Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Fantom and outsmarting the smart money. So with any asset, Fantom very much included, there are going to be times where the probability of upside far outweighs the probability of downside, and that tends to coincide with good accumulation zones. And then vice versa, there are points in time when the probability of downside far outweighs the probability of upside in the future, and that tends to mark good distribution times. And we talk about quote-unquote smart money, it's that exact type of thing that they are doing. They are understanding when the probabilities are stacked in their favor to be accumulating an asset, in this case, for example, Fantom, and then also when the probabilities are stacked against them to be acquiring it, or put differently, when the probability of downside is quite high, and that then will mark a good distribution point. And of course, the difficulty of being smart money is knowing what those probabilities are. How do you know when the probability of upside far outweighs the probability of downside? And how do you know when the probability of downside far outweighs the probability of upside? Now, fortunately, and this is kind of getting this idea of outsmarting the smart money, we have a model here at Upside Down Data that gives you that exact information. And that's what I'm showing you here. This is our probabilistic forecast model applied to Fantom. And this blue line here is the model's output across time. So the green line is the Fantom price, blue line is the model's output. And what this is telling you is what is the probability that the price of Fantom will be above where it is today 6 months in the future? How likely is it that the price of Fantom will be above where it is currently 6 months in the future? And so that's what the y-axis here is, the probability of upside. So it goes all the way, of course, from 0 to 100. And as you can see throughout history, this model does a fantastic job of identifying these points where being bullish on Fantom, it's giving Fantom a very high probability of upside 6 months in the future. And sure enough, that marks this big bull run all the way here from 2020 all the way up into late 2021. And then, of course, as we went into that final leg of the bull market for Fantom in late 2021, look what the model did. It started getting very bearish on Fantom through here. So as we were going to an new all-time high for Fantom, the model was really falling off a cliff. And then at, right around the highs through here, it was giving less than a 10% chance of upside 6 months in the future. In fact, it was down all the way at about 5%. And really what it was doing was it was foreseeing this bear market that was coming. It was saying things are not looking good for Fantom. The probability of upside is very low, and therefore the probability of downside is very high. So if we're thinking about that smart money idea, again, the idea would have been that smart money were accumulating down here when the probability of upside was quite high for Fantom. Then they were distributing down here when the probability of upside was quite low, when this would therefore mark a good distribution point. Now, importantly, if we look at what's been happening more recently, as we got down to the bottom of, at least so far, the bottom of this bear market, the probabilities have now been switching back to the other side and been switching more bullish. And in fact, the model currently estimates about an 83% chance of upside 6 months from now for Fantom. So we're seeing a potential turning in the tide for Fantom. Something that's looking now more akin to how things looked back over here, very much not the way things looked over here. Over here, it would have been extremely hard. It was extremely hard to be bullish on Fantom in this kind of a context. It's a lot easier to be bullish in Fantom with the model now having this kind of outlook. And sure enough, we saw Fantom already put in a pretty massive move out of the lows down here, again, while the model was getting more bullish. So in some ways, that's not especially surprising. And so that's where I think this model is just super valuable, because this, I think, is the information that people really want. What is the probability of upside in the future? How can I actually put a probabilistic estimate on that number? If you're doing this blindly on your own, it's really hard. Because when you're at the top of a bull market, everyone out there, everyone on crypto Twitter, everyone on YouTube is saying, oh, Fantom's going to go to $10, Fantom's going to $20. And that sounds great because you're just looking at what Fantom had done in the past and you say, yeah, of course, Fantom has been ripping to the upside. Why should that stop? And of course, that kind of thinking at around the top gets a lot of people to FOMO in the market, and then lose a ton of money. Fantom went down a max of about 95% from its all-time high towards the low of the bear market. That would have absolutely wrecked some people. So there's some people who probably went in very heavy on Fantom, buying into the hype up here, that got destroyed. And so the benefit of a model like this is it lets us step away from our subjective evaluations, from the hype, from the greed that takes over in these types of the market, and view things more objectively. From the model's perspective, the model doesn't care about the hype. The model doesn't care about what other people are saying. It's going to tell you what it thinks is correct. And it was saying here, get the hell out. This is not a great time to be acquiring Fantom. In fact, it's probably just a fantastic time to be selling Fantom. And of course, that's what we saw. This big bear market came. And so now things are switching back to the upside. So we're going to have to wait and see, obviously, if things play out the same way they did in the past. But so far, so good, right? Certainly so far, so good. The model flipped bullish, and so far, we've certainly been moving nicely off of the lows. So we'll have to wait and see if that continues. Now, obviously, you have to give the normal caveats where, we have to assume that there isn't some massive surprise that rugs the market, or, entering into a recession where stock market falls off a cliff and everything goes to hell and you don't really know what could potentially happen in that kind of a situation. Anything is really possible. But barring those kind of extreme unforeseeable circumstances, the model is saying right now that a bullish outlook for Fantom is its base case, and by a decent margin too, being up at 83% probability to the upside. So it's not guaranteed, it's not 100%, but it's much better than 10% where we were down here, or even through here, down at 30, 40%. It's definitely a more bullish outlook now than it was there from this model's perspective. And again, just to kind of reiterate with this, you're not going to find this model anywhere else. That's why I built this model. You're not going to find a model out on crypto Twitter, on YouTube, that gives you this kind of information. I have not come across anyone else who's even trying to build a model like this. And that's really why I built this, because I think this is really important information to help navigate markets by offering this probabilistic estimate about a future projection. And you're not going to see this anywhere else. I think this is a very interesting model. It's one I've been following closely ever since I built it. I'm going to continue doing that in the future. So of course, not financial advice. You should make of these data as you will, make your own decisions regarding Fantom. But this is the first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of how I'm thinking about Fantom. And from this model's perspective, a bullish outlook is certainly very reasonable. So let's go ahead and switch now just to one other model that we have here at the channel that I think is useful to talk about, the upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So this is the long-term version of the model that I'm showing you here. This cares about moves that play out over months to multiple months or even years in this time frame. And this also tells us useful information. So this doesn't apply a specific time frame to its estimate like the probabilistic forecast model does. This one is just more talking about what is the amount of plausible upside relative to the downside potential that exists for an asset, and then lets you make your judgments based on that. So it's basically a risk model. So very high levels on this model indicate high risk, where continued upside in that point in time is unlikely, and risk likely is to cool off before the next leg up can happen. And then likewise, very low levels say that realistic downside is quite low from that level, upside is quite plausible going out from there. And so you see it did a fantastic job of navigating Fantom as well. So this one, gets really high at this local high here, and then indeed we had to correct, and then goes up here, gets really high at the all-time high, and then indeed we had to go and have this massive bear market. And so we went down, we hit a low all the way down around -3, which coincidentally ended up actually being a similar level which we hit over here. So maybe not very much coincidence, maybe just kind of a typical level that Fantom tends to hit. So -3, we had a bounce. Around -3, had a bounce, brief bounce again, which then ultimately led into this big run up that we had over here. Got up to above 1, so 1.4 more or less. And then we've had to kind of cool off, kind of chop sideways from here. So now what I'm looking for with the long-term UDPI is, we've cooled off considerably. We're down at about -1.4. I would expect that if risk cools off further from here, the more it cools off, the more likely we are to be able to set up for that next leg up for Fantom, if the broader market allows. And that's, of course, the key caveat here. So far, with this current, more recent crypto rally, it's been a Bitcoin-only thing by and large. Bitcoin has been moving up to higher highs. Altcoins have been kind of just lagging behind. So I think we're going to need to see for Fantom to be able to realize this realistic upside potential that the model is giving it is another alt season. We need to see a shift in the market dynamics where it's no longer the case that Bitcoin's the only thing that the market seems to care about, but then potentially profits flowing out of Bitcoin into some of these altcoins to be able to elevate them up further. That might require something like Bitcoin having another big rally and then people wanting to take more risk. Maybe that coincides with broader risk taking in risk assets in general, like the stock market, that then has people, instead of just taking profits out of Bitcoin and holding it in cash or other safe stores of value, instead what they do is they take those profits and dump it into something more risky to try to compound the profits. And that's where alt seasons are. That's what alt seasons are made of, is people trying to compound profits off of assets like Bitcoin in riskier assets like altcoins. So if we start to see some of those dynamics play out, and especially if risk cools off even further, I think negative 1.4 could be far enough for Fantom. But certainly if it cools off to these levels like we've seen down here, if we just kind of chop sideways or kind of move down a bit more for Fantom's price, let risk get down to these levels again, then if another alt season kind of launches off, I would expect Fantom to potentially be able to do very well and start to get back up to these higher levels. So again, the probabilistic forecast model is saying it's seeing upside 6 months from now. A lot can happen before 6 months though. And so I think what we might look for in the meantime is some of those dynamics unfold and allow an alt season to develop, which then could see Fantom push up higher. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. So based on these two different models that I've been talking about, I think it's reasonable to have a bullish bias on Fantom with, of course, all the normal caveats in mind about, if broader markets fall off a cliff, who knows what's going to happen. But it does seem like the tone of the market has changed ever since the beginning of this year, and that up seems to be the more likely direction than down based on a lot of these models that we have. And we're going to, of course, have to wait and see how it all develops. But I think having that base case in mind is reasonable. And then, of course, managing risk and, navigating the market as one best sees fit. So, of course, again, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own decisions about how to navigate things. When I'm looking at the models, my personal take or my personal interpretation of these data, that a bullish outlook is more reasonable than a bearish outlook. But then what the possible upside is ultimately before maybe another correction has to form, that is yet to be seen. And I personally think it's unlikely that Fantom's just going to go ripping off to all-time highs anytime particularly soon. But I certainly think it's plausible that we could go and retest some of these higher levels that we had tested in the past before maybe having to cool off and correct again. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates about our indicators and more over there. And check out polaritydigital.io for live UDPI data and more for Fantom and other assets.